The Bible says that some things change and some things stay the same. And that is true in biblical times. That is true all through history. And that is very true today in everything that is happening in the Middle East. And what we want to talk about today is what has changed in the Middle East, what has stayed the same, and what does that mean for Israel, for God's people, and for the whole Middle East and the whole, and to a certain extent to the world, and even to you. This is DaviD TaL. This is a Balagan Connection. Today we're going to be talking Syria, we're going to be talking Israel, we're going to be talking Lebanon, and the rest of the Middle East, and trying to make a whole Balagan Connection of all the different aspects. Like I've said before, there are jump spots or little kind of chapters that you can click down below and go to any of these subjects if you want to go directly to that subject. And like we've said before, if you like what's going on here, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, and I'm trying to grow this. Leave your comments below. Me and Christy read the comments, and we really like what's going on. So if you want to do that, stay with me, and let's talk about what's happening now in the Middle East. Okay. One of the first things that came up on the news feed the other day was that pro-Iranian proxies, meaning Iranian elements, Shiite Iranian elements in Iraq, have decided to quit firing rockets at Israel. They've decided that they're not going to be a part of the Iranian ring of fire. And I'm adding that to the fact that according to the news, 6 Druze villages, Druze are a minority that lives in Israel and Lebanon and in Syria, but 6 Druze villages in Syria have actually handed over weapons that were cached in their area by the Syrian army over to Israel, and have actually officially requested that Israel annex them into Israel and not leave them to be under the new regime that was created in Syria. And those two things, together with everything else, is kind of connecting all of this. And there's a major shift happening in the Middle East. And we're going to go into that and talk about where and how that happens. We're going to do an autopsy of Iran's ring of fire that has basically been quenched or been put out by the Al-Aqsa Brigade or by the Al-Aqsa Flood. That was the attack on the 7th of October. And we're going to talk about how that connects to everything. So let's start off at the beginning. Lebanon. Let's start off with that. Lebanon was a country that is totally defragmented and actually was used as a base by the Hezbollah, which is a Shia Iranian proxy, to attack Israel. Not only to attack Israel on a regular basis, but to be a threat against Israel to do what Iran wants it to do, or not to do what Iran doesn't want it to do. So there is always the threat of the Hezbollah in southern Lebanon firing rockets into Israel, firing rockets at gas platforms in the Mediterranean Sea. And in Lebanon, the Hezbollah has been completely sidelined. It hasn't disappeared. It hasn't gone. Okay, but its whole hierarchy, its whole command structure has been completely decimated. The amount of fighters that have been hit over the last couple of months are amazing. It started off with the beeper, the pager incident, if you remember that, and they've been totally put on their back foot, which means, one, they are not the threat to Israel, and as a result of that, they've signed a ceasefire with Israel that basically says that they're not going to be firing more at Israel, and they have moved out of the southern part of Lebanon. That actually pushes them away from being able to directly threaten Israel, which has allowed Israel and a lot of people that I know to move back into the areas along the border on the northern part of Israel. So that, together with the next element, because Syria has completely dismantled. Syria was a dictatorship regime, very, very cruel, that was being held up by Russian air power on one side, Iranian fighters and funding on the other side, and Hezbollah fighters from Lebanon that were actually in the fighting for the Assad regime. Completely fallen apart. So it's part of the reason, by the way, the regime fell apart, because we had taken out the Hezbollah and they couldn't help the Iranians, and because the Russians, I think, to a certain extent, didn't want to mess up with us. After we had taken the gloves off and we were hitting Iran on a regular basis, the Russian says, we don't need this, and added to all the rest of the things that we're dealing with. So Iran has actually moved out, Russia has moved out, Assad has moved out, and what we have now is a new government that is based on Muslim Brotherhood jihadi organizations. And the guy that we're talking about, let me see if I can get his name, Muhammad al-Julani, which is his war name, okay? Ahmed Ashara is his actual name, was now sitting in the presidential palace in Damascus, and he is actually running the show. Now, the problem is that this guy, al-Julani, has been recruited by ISIS, has been trained by al-Qaeda. I mean, the guy is a fundamentalist Muslim jihadist, and now he's in control of the gap between the Mediterranean Sea, Iraq, and Iran, and he's sitting on our northern border. So everybody's kind of worried about this, even though he's trying to portray a pro-Western kind of mentality. So he took off his uniform, he cut his beard a little bit shorter. Now he's got a jacket and a tie. He's talking to Western journalism. And one of the things that he has said is that he doesn't want to fight with Israel. Not for the next 20 years. That's basically what he said. Now, he didn't say he doesn't want to fight with Israel, and he cannot say he doesn't want to fight with Israel because the basis of his whole platform is taken over the whole Levant, taken over the whole area that is in the Middle East. So he is dedicated to fighting Israel, but he's decided to put it off for 20 years. Which is why Israel is not sure how we can relate to them. Now remember, he was funded by the Qataris and supported by the Turks, and the Turks are actually reaching down into Turkey. And if you look at the map, that's going to connect to everything that we're talking about, reaching down from Turkey, which is into the north, into the area between us and them. Now, let's make this clear. All of the players in Syria are not lovers of Israel and definitely not lovers of the United States and the Western world. So we have an anti-Israel Islamic jihadi organization setting up shop in Syria, and Israel is trying to decide how we're going to deal with it. In the meantime, we've buffered up the area, and I'll show you on the map, the area between us and Syria on the Golan Heights always had a separation zone that the UN sat in. We've raised or enlarged that separation zone. We're sitting inside the UN-held area that was held before, and we're being very, very careful to be there and not allow anything to attack us from that side. On the other hand, Israel has taken out assets, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, long-range artillery, naval assets all over Syria to make sure that if we do find out that the El Julani, whatever that is, government or whatever is going to be there, is not pro-Israel and is trying to use Israel as a base to attack, that they don't have the means to attack. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not a really good solution, or not a total solution, because don't forget, they're being funded by Qatar and they're being supplied by Turkey, who has a huge military establishment, including being a part of NATO. So if they want to rearm and resupply the jihadi Muslim Brotherhood element now in Syria, they have the ability to do that. But it's going to take them a while. So that's the situation that we have sitting in Syria right now. On the east, go east from Syria, the Iraqi government that has been a conglomeration of different factions after the fall of Saddam Hussein and after the United States left Iraq, the Iraqi government has put pressure through the United States, or the United States has put pressure through the Iraqi government on the Shia elements inside Iraq to stop being used as a base to attack Israel. Meaning Iran has lost its proxy, or the ability of its proxy to attack Israel in Iraq. So that's another element. And they've said that they're not going to fire at Israel anymore, and they're kind of clicking or actually looking towards the West. On the corner between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, or a group of people called the Kurds. Now, the Kurds have been a thorn in Turkey's side for a long time because the Kurds want a Kurdistan, or an independent area in their area, and they've been a threat. One of the reasons Turkey has allowed the Muslim Brotherhood to move into Syria is because they want them to fight against the Kurds in the north. So there's going to be fighting between Turkey and the Syrian factions in the northern area, and we're going to have to wait and see how that's going to happen. It seems like the United States, that was supporting the Kurds, and Israel even to a certain extent, is more or less said, we can't deal with this. And I'm sad to say it looks like the Turkish idea of independence as a result of what's going on is probably not going to be, how do you say, materialized in this area. So that is Iraq and Syria. If we go down to our south, Hamas in the Gaza Strip has been literally driven underground. Now, don't get me wrong. 3 soldiers were killed yesterday from a booby-trapped building. There's still a lot of Hamas inside. They still probably have a couple of rockets, but they are not the military threat they are. And right now, the negotiation that's going on between Israel, the United States, Turkey, Israel, the United States, Egypt, another faction, is what's going to happen in Gaza the day after. Israel wants to keep 2 corridors or 2 strips or control of 2 axes that actually cut off the Gaza Strip. One corridor is the Philadelphia corridor. We've kind of mentioned this. The other is the Netzarim corridor running through the middle, and that's a negotiation that's going on. Will Israel retain control of both corridors or just one of them? How many hostages are going to be released? And who's going to be in control of the Gaza Strip after? There's growing signs that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank are getting together to be the functionary or the government that's going to stay in Gaza afterward. Which brings us to the West Bank. The West Bank is bubbling right now. Okay, and again, the West Bank is the area in Judea and Samaria. This is mostly controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Parts of the West Bank are controlled by Israel, but there's been a growing campaign in the West Bank by Israel and by the Palestinian Authority in order to put down the jihadi elements inside the West Bank. And in Jenin, the Palestinian Authority actually had a massive battle against the Islamics inside there, which means the Palestinian Authority is on the side of Israel in putting down the Islamic, the more radical factions. The reason for that is because everybody in the Middle East is looking at what happened in Syria and the rise of Muslim radicalism. Now, we've all dealt with Shia Iranian radicalism, but don't forget that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were Muslim radicals. And they are the ones that overthrew the government, and there's a fear both in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, and us in Egypt and other more moderate Muslim countries, that this fervorous rise of jihadi fervor that we've seen in other times is going to sweep through all of the Middle East. So everybody's being very, very careful to keep the heads down of the jihadi in their area. Jordan has cracked down on them. Israel in the West Bank has cracked down on the Palestinian Authority. And Egypt has cracked down. So you've got this, let's get the Muslim Brotherhood's head down while we go through this whole reorganization in Syria as that takes place. Yemen's on the list here. Fired a couple of rockets. I mean, they fire, let's say, 2 rockets a week. Long-range ballistic rockets from about 1,800 miles away. They sit on the Bab el-Mandeb. I think we've shown this on the map, but if not, this is where you are, and this is the waterway that they're very, very in control of, which is why the United States and the rest of the world, by the way, the United States has kept freedom of the seas open for all of the rest of the world for the last 70 years, or since World War II, if you want to put it this way. The United States has been the naval policeman of the whole world. These Houthi rebels in Yemen, on the behest of Iran, are actually putting the United States in a bad place and the rest of the world in a bad place. So the United States has been hitting them pretty hard. But when they fire at us, it all changes. The problem is there's nothing to shoot back at. I mean, this is a straw man. I mean, they're impoverished. They have no economy, and we've taken out 2 ports. But the question is, there's nothing to hit. It looks like Israel's going to have to do what we did with Hamas and somehow get into there and take out their leadership. But it's a very fanatical, and they're the only ones who are raising the flag of the jihad right now in the name of the Iranians, which is why the Iranians are going to continue to supply and allow them to die in their tunnels in Yemen until something basically happens. But Saudi Arabia, Israel, the U.S. is trying to put them under some kind of lock and key. Which brings us to Iran. Iran is the massive loser in all of this. They've lost their proxies all over the Middle East. The billions of dollars that they've invested into building these proxies all over the Middle East to be their power projector in the Middle East, they've lost all of that, which means the Iranian bear is on its back foot right now. And everybody is worried that they're going to shoot for or press the button of or start enhancing their nuclear program. That's what we're looking at right now. Israel is worried about it. The United States is worried about it, and President Trump has already related to that. There's a lot of talking about maybe a joint action between Israel and the United States. I've said this before. I think we've got a short window here where something like that can happen, and if Trump can pull some kind of rabbit, some kind of economic, business, political solution out of his hat, that would be amazing. But it seems like Iran has nothing to lose right now than to push forward onto the nuclear program. I'm going to say something weird that a lot of people might not agree with me on. If Iran has shown over the last year and a half that their bark is larger than their bite on all kinds of technological and all kinds of political areas. They were saying, oh, we can do this, we can do this, we can do that. And we've realized that they are not as sophisticated, not as capable as they can. We might see that Iran's nuclear program is more bark than bite. And I got to be careful saying that. I don't really have any information, but we're seeing other things that they were invested in, and it actually makes sense that that might be the situation that we're talking about. Israel is hitting the jihad. Israel is hitting the Muslims, the fanatic Muslims all over the Middle East. We've become the main projector of power in the Middle East. And what's happened, I think I've mentioned this before, we're going from a two-side balancing act to a three-side balancing act in the Middle East right now. When I say balancing act, there were two main axes. There was Iran. When I say axis, I mean the ability of a nation to project military power, and as a result of that, to receive the political, diplomatic dividends of being able to do that. Iran was there with its capabilities and its proxies, and Iran is gone, not completely, but has been put in place. Israel has risen up as a power projector, and the whole world, and the Middle East for sure, is going to be very, very careful about what they do with Israel. And it makes us more lucrative, more valuable for a moderate Abrahamic Accords in the Middle East. But we've got a new player coming up, and that is the axis of Turkey and Qatar. Turkey's capabilities, Qatar's funding, and now with a major base in Syria, that might be the third axis that we're going to be talking about, and it looks like that is going to be going into the future. So that was a quick overview of what's going on about everything in the Middle East. We're all on the cusp of something. We're all on the edge of something. The whole world, and Israel in particular, and the Middle East in particular, is waiting to see what this new president, what President Trump, which if you are an American and you went to the elections here, I want to say thank you. If you're an Israeli watching this, you are thanking the Americans. But anywhere in the world, we're going to see that there's a major shift in, I'm going to say, back towards, I can't say all of it, but back towards at least some of the godly values that the Western world was built on, the Judeo-Christian creed, the idea of reasonableness, the idea of a sense of, how do you say, community to your nation, the idea of a nation state, the idea of borders. All of these are things that were being faded by the enemy and have now been placed back on. We're going to see how that works out and how the world is going to change as a result of all of this happening in the United States and in the Middle East. But let's not forget, Russia is on its back feet, on its heels. China, it turns out, they're on their heels, and it looks like if they don't pull off something in the near future, they're not going to be able to, because the Western world is leaving them behind. The Islamic axis is on its back foot, so everything is moving in a certain direction. But if you open up your Bible and look to anything that's happened in this country over the years, we will go into a sense of security. We will go into leaning on a bamboo reed, leaning on a broken reed, as Jeremiah says, and that is going to bite us big time. And that's where the biblical prophecy comes into play. And all of these things you can see lining up to different events that we'll be talking about over the next couple of videos about how this is going to play into what's going to happen here in the end. And a quick reminder, we know who's going to win at the end of this. We know what the final result is. The only question is, how do we kind of connect this along the way? In the meantime, Gihon Springs has been doing amazing work in Israel. We've been supporting widows of the fighting and of the battles in Israel. We've been supporting Netiva, which is doing amazing work. We've been supporting a pro-life group. And what we're getting funds, more and more funds. And before I forget, for all the people who are donating to Gihon Springs, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being a part of this amazing work. But if you want to join in us, there's going to be a link to Gihon Springs down there. If you want to support me, and I got to tell you, tourism hasn't picked up yet, so I don't know when I'm going to go back on the tourism payroll. So if you want to support me and Christy and what we're doing here, we're going to different churches, we're going to different conferences, talking about what's going on in Israel, and connecting the different churches to what's going on in Israel as much as we possibly can. These couple of weeks are going to be amazing. And last but not least, on the hill just outside of Jerusalem, a little bit more than 2,000 years ago, something miraculous happened. Now, I'm not sure about the 25th of December, but we've decided to use this as a date to remember that on that hill, between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, the angels came down and talked to the shepherds and say, listen, this is the time. And for a couple of days now, we're going to be celebrating what happened on that hill and what happened in Bethlehem. And what I'm trying to say is this. This is a time of joy. This is a time of peace. And my word, or my soul, has been talking about, connecting to, and reading about peace lately. So if there's anything I want to convey to you during this very special period is, one, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And may this be the beginning of a time of peace for me, my family, you and your family, for everybody here in the States and everybody in Israel. Merry Christmas. Hope to see you soon.